All right, we're about to dive into a story that, according to some journalists, is a puzzle that's been 40 years in the making. We're talking about pieces scattered across continents and decades, allegedly connecting the old Cold War Kremlin all the way to the modern White House.
So this really is the central question, isn't it? Based on years of work from journalists like Craig Unger, the whole thing boils down to this. Why did a U.S. president's foreign policy seem to consistently, almost perfectly, benefit the Kremlin? It's a huge question, and to even start to answer it, we've got to look way beyond the usual day-to-day headlines.
Okay, so to even begin to piece this puzzle together, the reporting says we can't start in 2016. Nope, we have to rewind the clock way back.
So, where does this whole story allegedly begin? Not in the 2010s, but all the way back in the 1980s. We're talking deep in the Cold War, with Soviet intelligence operations reportedly setting the stage for everything that was to come.
All right, Section 2, the first files from the 1980s. So where do these first clues even come from? Well, according to reports from outlets like The Guardian, they started popping up in recently declassified intelligence files from the old Eastern Bloc. Okay, so get this. According to these declassified files, Trump first pops up on the radar of Soviet bloc intelligence way back in 1977. And the alleged entry point? His marriage to Ivana, who was a Czechoslovakian citizen. That apparently opened the door. The Czech secret police, the STB, starts monitoring the couple. But here's the really wild part from the files. They allegedly recruited Ivana's own father as an informant, a conspiratorial informer they called him. So he was supposedly feeding them info on his own daughter and his new, very high-profile American son-in-law. Just, wow.
And from there, the monitoring reportedly just ramped up. Fast forward a decade to 1987, Trump makes his first trip to Moscow. Now, the sources are really clear on this. This wasn't just some casual tourist visit. It was a high-level red carpet affair personally set up by the Soviet ambassador himself. You can bet that's the kind of trip that makes intelligence agencies on both sides sit up and pay very close attention.
This brings us to a really crucial idea: the art of cultivation. You hear this term a lot from intelligence experts cited in the sources. So what exactly is cultivation? It's absolutely key to understanding the story they're laying out.
Okay, this distinction is so important. We're not necessarily talking about an agent, the classic trench coat spy getting secret orders. No, the sources, like journalist Craig Unger, argue we should be thinking about the idea of an asset. An asset is, well, it's a different game entirely. It's someone who is influenced, maybe unknowingly, over a very long time. Their worldview is slowly shaped, massaged, until their actions and goals just happen to line up perfectly with what a foreign power wants. It's not about taking orders, it's about shaping motivations. It's influence, not instruction.
So according to these reports, there's a kind of playbook for this. Step 1, you identify vulnerabilities. Are they driven by vanity? Are they in financial trouble? Step 2, you move in with flattery and finance. You praise them, offer them amazing business deals, maybe even help bail them out. Then, step 3 is crucial. You slowly shape their worldview, feeding them ideas and narratives that happen to align with your own goals, until, finally, you get to step 4, alignment. The asset starts acting and speaking in ways that benefit you, seemingly all on their own.
And get this, according to declassified documents The Guardian got a hold of, this wasn't just some abstract theory. In the mid-1980s, the actual head of the KGB, Vladimir Krichkov, was apparently sending out instructions telling his officers to go out and find people exactly like this. Specifically, upwardly mobile Americans in business and politics. They were actively hunting for potential assets to cultivate.
Okay, so that's the theory. Now let's get into the alleged 4-decade pattern. How did this idea of cultivation and financial ties supposedly play out in the real world over the next few decades?
So let's pick up the timeline right after that first trip to Moscow in July 1987. Because what happens next is something that reporters and even some former intelligence officers look at as a huge, blinking red flag.
Literally just weeks after he gets back from Moscow, he spends nearly $100,000 on these full-page ads in major American newspapers. And the headline is all about how America needs more backbone in its foreign policy. The ads go after key U.S. allies and question the whole point of NATO. Now, for some investigators, this was a jaw-dropper. A former KGB major named Yuri Shwets is quoted in the New Republic calling it one of the KGB's most successful active measures, that's their term for influence ops, of all time. Why? Because the message in the ads was a perfect mirror of the Kremlin's own talking points aimed at weakening the NATO alliance.
And then there's the money.
The sources allege a decades-long pattern of financial lifelines, often coming just as his businesses were struggling. The narrative they present is that when U.S. banks backed away, money from Russian-linked sources kept things afloat. You can see some of the key moments here. In the 80s, claims of cash from Soviet-linked figures. By 2002, a firm with alleged Kremlin ties is financing Trump-branded projects. In 2008, his son, Eric, is even quoted saying they received significant funding from Russia. And of course, in 2013, he hosts the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow, and it's financed by an oligarch known to be close to Putin.
Okay, so this is the big one, the alleged Kremlin payoff. How does this whole 40-year backstory supposedly connect to actual U.S. foreign policy in the 21st century? This is where the journalists behind this story argue all those puzzle pieces finally click into place.
And you can really see the core of the argument right here. On one side, you have the traditional bipartisan American stance on foreign policy for decades, and on the other, you have the specific stance taken during the Trump presidency, according to these sources. And look at the difference. Questioning NATO, downplaying Russian aggression, withholding aid from an ally like Ukraine, and siding with Putin over U.S. intelligence. The reporting argues that this sharp break isn't random. It's the alleged payoff for decades of cultivation.
$400 million. Let that sink in. This isn't just a random number. According to testimony from the 2019 impeachment hearings, this is the amount of military aid approved by Congress for Ukraine, a country literally fighting off a Russian invasion that Trump personally ordered to be blocked.
And it wasn't just actions, it was words too. Take this quote from a UN speech. He basically suggested that Ukraine was bringing its troubles on itself. For the journalists covering this, that language was a massive deal. They argue that he was essentially blaming the victim, which is a classic Kremlin talking point. It undermines the entire Western alliance, and, not surprisingly, Russian state media reportedly ate it up and broadcast it everywhere. See, look at this 40-year pattern that these sources have laid out. The alleged cultivation, the financial ties, the policy decisions, and it leaves us with this one really big question. Where does influence end and ideology begin? Was this, as some allege, a masterful, decades-long intelligence operation that finally hit the jackpot? Or is it just the case of someone whose personal ideology happened to align perfectly with Moscow's? The sources lay out all the pieces, but that final question, they leave that for us to figure out.